I found out that my girlfriend called me a stable working ATM and used me, but I got my revenge. Hello, Reddit. Before I jump in, please take a second to like this post, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It really helps. Our channel gets barely any views, and most people don't stick around to the end. Your support makes all the difference. So, this happened last spring, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. My name's Justin. I'm 34 and I live in Denver, working as a chiropractor at a pretty solid sports rehab clinic. I've built a good life for myself, debt-free. I own a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, and I've been out of the dating scene for a bit, just focusing on work and personal goals. The last serious relationship I had ended when I was 31. She wanted to move to New York for work. I didn't. That was that. Anyway, it was one of those crisp Colorado weekends when I ended up at a charity marathon. One of our clinic's clients was sponsoring the event, and a couple of us volunteered at the first aid booth. Just basic stuff. Ice packs, hydration, helping runners stretch out cramped quads. I was wearing one of those unflattering neon volunteer shirts and probably looked like I hadn't slept much, because I hadn't. That's when I saw her. Cameron. She didn't look like she belonged there. Not in a bad way, just different. While everyone else was in running gear or volunteer clothes, she looked like she had stepped off a shoot for a fitness brand. High-waisted leggings, sports bra under a half-zipped hoodie, hair in this perfect, messy ponytail, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was walking around with a camera and a giant cold brew, barely glancing at the race itself. I assumed she was some influencer doing promo for one of the sponsors. I was setting up some foam rollers near our booth when she walked over and said, "You look like someone who knows how to fix lower backs. You work here." I was so caught off guard I actually laughed and said, "Yeah, I do, but usually without the highlighter shirt." She smiled and asked if we were doing anything later because there was going to be an after-party at a rooftop bar downtown, and she thought I seemed chill. I swear I looked around for a hidden camera. I don't get approached like that. I'm not saying I'm a troll. I work out, I dress decently, I've been told I have nice eyes. But Cameron was just way out of my league. Like LA hot in a Denver world. Still, I went. I met her later that evening at the bar she mentioned, some swanky spot with overpriced drinks and a fake grass patio. She was already there when I arrived, standing with a group of people who looked like they all had 6-figure Instagram followings. I felt like I had wandered into a reality show by accident. But the second she saw me, she walked over, gave me a quick hug, and introduced me to everyone like I was someone important. "This is Justin," she said, "the chiropractor/hero from earlier." I corrected her with a laugh, "Just chiropractor. No heroism involved." But she waved it off. And here's the weird part. She actually talked to me. Like, really talked. Not the surface-level influencer banter I expected. We got a corner of the patio to ourselves and talked about all kinds of stuff. Her childhood in Santa Fe, her obsession with antique bookstores, the fact that she tried to learn Mandarin 3 separate times and failed each one. I told her about how I got into chiropractic work after a football injury in high school and how I used to think I'd be a physical therapist before I realized I hated hospitals. At one point, I looked at my phone and realized it had been almost 3 hours. I hadn't even noticed. I thought I'd be standing there awkwardly sipping a beer, but instead, I was sitting across from someone who made me forget about everything else. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Like the eye contact, the questions, the little jokes that didn't feel forced. It wasn't just charm, it felt intentional. We didn't kiss that night. She gave me a hug before leaving in an Uber with her friend and said, "Let's do this again. Soon." Then she just left. I remember standing there in the cool night air wondering what the hell just happened. Part of me thought she was messing with me. I've dated women before, but Cameron was in another category. Like, the kind of woman who's used to guys tripping over themselves to get her attention. And she picked me? The guy who had granola in his car and a half-eaten protein bar in his backpack? But whatever it was, it felt real. And that scared me a little. Our first few dates felt like something out of a movie, the kind of montage you'd see in a rom-com where everything just fits. Cameron had this way of making even the most ordinary things feel cinematic. We started simple, a coffee date in Wash Park where we sat on the patio of some tucked-away little spot and talked until the barista politely asked us to wrap up because they were closing. A few days later, we hit a contemporary art exhibit at the MCA. I'm not a huge art guy, but she walked me through the whole thing like she was curating it herself, pointing out weird installations and making jokes about how one sculpture looked like a pile of dryer lint glued to a chair. We ended the night with dinner at this Vietnamese place she recommended, and again, we closed the place down. She had a rhythm to her. The way she talked, the way she leaned in when I spoke, like she was genuinely listening, not just nodding to be polite. She asked thoughtful questions about my work, about my patients, about the weirdest injuries I'd ever treated. I told her about a marathon runner who came in with a torn calf and refused to stop training, and she said, "See, that's what I mean. You're not just helping people heal. You're keeping their dreams alive." I laughed, said that was a bit dramatic, but she just smiled and replied, "You're too humble for your own good." It felt incredible, like I'd somehow skipped the awkward getting to know you phase and landed in something real. She was affectionate right out of the gate, texting me good morning, calling me on her lunch breaks, showing up at my clinic with smoothies or snacks when she knew I had back-to-back appointments. And it wasn't clingy. At least, it didn't feel that way. It felt flattering, like I mattered, like she couldn't get enough of me. And I'll be honest, I liked it. Within 2 weeks, she had introduced me to half her circle. She took me to a dinner party hosted by one of her brand partners, some guy who ran a startup that made vegan protein powder. She swept me into the room like she was walking the red carpet and said, "This is Justin, my favorite sports medicine pro. He's basically a doctor, but way cooler. And he owns his own place. Can you believe that?" It was the first time I noticed how much she talked about what I did, not who I was. She'd emphasize the chiropractic part, sure, but then she'd add stuff like, "He works with elite athletes," which wasn't exactly false, but not the way I described it. Most of my clients were runners, CrossFit folks, and people recovering from weekend warrior injuries, not exactly Olympians. She also kept bringing up how refreshing it was to date someone with a stable income, someone who didn't need to figure things out at 30. I wasn't sure what to make of that. I'd always been proud of my work, but now it felt like I was being packaged. Around this same time, she told me she was making a career pivot. She had been doing hotel management, she said, working for boutique resorts and travel brands. But now, she was launching her own thing, personal brand consulting, she called it, helping influencers and entrepreneurs elevate their image, design their digital presence, build monetizable content strategies. It sounded vague, but I didn't want to be the guy who questioned someone's dream. I just nodded and asked questions like, "So what kind of clients are you working with? Or are you building a team?" She always had answers, but they felt slippery. She'd say things like, "Right now it's mostly confidential, but I've got a client launching a wellness app, and I'm helping a friend pivot into lifestyle vlogging." No names, no websites, no specifics. She started calling me her anchor, which I didn't fully understand, but it sounded good. She said I kept her grounded, that I was the reason she felt stable enough to take risks in her business. I didn't think much of it. I figured she was being poetic, maybe overly sentimental. But in hindsight, I should have seen it for what it was, this subtle wrapping of her ambitions around my presence. Like I was part of the pitch she was selling, even when I wasn't in the room. Looking back, it's wild how fast everything moved. We were barely a month in, and it already felt like we were a couple who had been together for a year. She'd post pictures of us constantly. Me holding her hand at brunch, me kissing her cheek at a gallery opening, me carrying a grocery bag while she made some cute boyfriend joke in the caption. Her followers ate it up. She'd scroll through the comments, reading them aloud like they were a scoreboard. "OMG, couple goals. I need a Justin in my life. You two are perfect." I'd smile and play along, but deep down, I started feeling like a character in her story rather than a person in my own life. Like I had been cast in a role without fully realizing it. And the weird thing was, I didn't mind. Not at first. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. I was wanted, admired, maybe even loved. Or at least, that's what I told myself. It was around the 7-month mark when Cameron first brought up the idea of moving in together. We were having dinner at my place. She'd made some kind of quinoa bowl with roasted vegetables and tahini dressing, which she said was part of a gut reset challenge she'd started that week. I remember I was sitting on the bar stool by the counter when she leaned across with this half-serious, half-pained look and said, "I don't think I can do it anymore." At first, I thought she meant the reset. I was about to tell her no one was forcing her to eat purple cabbage every day, but then she launched into this whole explanation about her living situation. Apparently, her roommate, this girl named Lindsay she'd barely mentioned before, had become completely unhinged. She said she was controlling, borderline manipulative, constantly stealing her clothes and bringing random guys over at night. Their apartment was a closet with walls, she said, with mold in the shower and windows that didn't open all the way. She made it sound like she was surviving in a war zone. "I wake up anxious," she said, placing her hand on mine. "I need stability. I can't be in that energy anymore." I hesitated for a second, but she didn't give me much room to process it. She followed it up with, "But when I'm here, I feel safe. I sleep better, I think better. This feels like home to me." "You feel like home." And what was I supposed to say to that? I'd never lived with anyone before, not even in college, really, since I'd had my own studio apartment by the time I was 21. But Cameron had practically been living at my place anyway. Her stuff had started to accumulate. First a few hoodies, then an entire drawer in my dresser, then a curated line of skincare products that somehow took over the bathroom counter. It wasn't a leap. It just meant making it official. So I said yes. She moved in the next week. At first, it was great. She was grateful, affectionate, super engaged. She reorganized my kitchen and claimed it was more intuitive now, started lighting candles in the living room, and hung up a framed quote that said, "Live gently, love fiercely," above the couch. She made morning smoothies, put eucalyptus in the shower, and said things like, "Look at us, building a little life." We didn't talk much about expenses. I figured we'd split things down the middle like we'd always kind of done when she stayed over. But then the first utility bill came, and when I mentioned it casually while we were both on the couch, she blinked and said, "Oh shoot, can I Venmo you next week?" One of my clients rescheduled, and I had to pay for that certification thing. I told her no problem, not even thinking twice about it. But next week came, and then the week after that, and it never really came up again. Then it was groceries. I'd do our usual run at Whole Foods. She'd give me a list of her staples: almond flour, oat milk, obscure mushroom powders I didn't even know were edible. And when I asked if she could grab the receipt to split, she'd smile and say, "You're such a provider," then kiss my cheek and say something like, "Once I onboard this new client, I'm going to totally spoil you." Eventually, I stopped asking. She'd always have a reason. A client was late on payment. Her personal website redesign ran over budget. She had to buy a virtual course to keep up her consulting edge. One time, she told me she'd just invested in a mastermind group for female entrepreneurs that cost nearly $2,000 but came with lifetime access to seven-figure strategies. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I figured it was temporary. Everyone has slow months. And she made it sound like everything was about to take off. "Next quarter is when I scale," she said once while we were eating frozen pizza on the balcony. "It's all about positioning right now." But the bills kept coming, and the money from her side didn't. I was covering rent. I was covering utilities. I was covering food, gas, streaming subscriptions, pet sitting fees when she decided we needed a break from the city and booked us a weekend in Aspen with her friend's golden retriever in tow. She paid for little things here and there, a bottle of wine, a candle from some overpriced boutique, but nothing substantial. When I finally brought it up, after a particularly tight month where I had to dip into my savings to pay off the credit card bill, she got quiet. Then her eyes welled up. She told me she felt like a failure, that she was trying her best, but she wasn't used to someone putting pressure on her, that it made her feel unsafe, and wasn't this supposed to be our safe space? So I backed off. Again, I told myself I was being a good partner, that she'd get back on her feet, that the financial stuff was just a phase. But somewhere between the yoga classes she paid for with gifted credits and the coaching sessions she said she was offering in exchange for exposure, I started to realize this wasn't a bump in the road. This was the road, and I was the one paving it. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing. It wasn't like Cameron emptied my wallet on day one or asked me to co-sign a loan. It crept in slowly, one urgent thing after another, always dressed up in the language of growth, self-care, and most of all, us. Everything was for the future we were supposedly building together. That's how she framed it, every single time. It started with small stuff. She needed a few $100 to cover a cosmetology procedure she called maintenance, something about collagen injections and skin rejuvenation, and she said she'd pay me back the next time a client invoice cleared. I remember she looked genuinely embarrassed when she asked. Said she hated even bringing it up. Swore it was a one-time thing. I just want to keep showing up as my best self, for both of us. I wired it to her the same day. Then it was a marketing course, one of those flashy online things run by a guy in a white t-shirt who yells about passive income. She told me it was a limited-time deal, some discounted package that would teach her how to scale her business and land higher-paying clients. "This is how we level up," she said, half on my lap, phone in hand, reading me the course description. "I'm going to pay you back as soon as I close this one-brand pitch. You'll see." I didn't see. I never saw. The pitch never closed. Her car needed repairs a couple of months later. It was some minor accident. She backed into a low pole in a parking lot, and suddenly her rear bumper was hanging loose and the tail light was cracked. She called me from the body shop, saying she didn't want to go through insurance because of the deductible and would I mind covering it. "I'll Venmo you as soon as I get my refund from that crypto tax thing," she said. "It's already processing." It never arrived. She brought it up once, vaguely, then never mentioned it again. At the same time, she kept orchestrating these big gestures. A surprise dinner at this downtown rooftop place that was probably double what I'd normally spend. She told me to dress up and said it was her way of celebrating me. "You work so hard," she said, clinking her glass of organic Riesling against mine. I remember feeling genuinely touched until the check came and she slid it across the table with a wink, saying, Your card or mine? Just kidding, yours. But it's all love, babe. She bought concert tickets to a band I liked and made this huge deal out of presenting them to me with a note that said, "For your amazing energy." When I looked closer, I saw the transaction in my banking app. She'd used my card for those too. I tried to rationalize it. Told myself that it was the thought that counted. That not everyone was great with money. That she had good intentions, just poor follow-through. But the months kept passing, and the debt kept climbing. Always my debt. And through it all, she had this way of wrapping every expense in this grand narrative. "This isn't about some dinner," she'd say. "It's about making memories. About showing the universe we're ready for the life we want." Or, "I'm not spending, I'm investing. In myself, in my clients, in us." That phrase, "in us," became her favorite weapon. Every dollar I spent, every bill I paid, every charge she justified came wrapped in that phrase. A $600 spa day she needed for mental reset. That was an investment in us. A Reiki certification course that included a 4-day retreat in Sedona. Us. The standing order of supplements and adaptogens that showed up at our door every 2 weeks. Also us. I wasn't some clueless guy with no financial literacy. I tracked my accounts. I had a spreadsheet. I knew exactly what was coming in and what was going out. And I watched, with this strange mix of denial and resignation, as the out started to win. I started skipping lunches at work and taking coffee from home just to stay ahead of the credit card bills. I stopped putting extra toward my mortgage. I even canceled a trip I'd been planning with friends for months because I didn't want to say I couldn't afford it. Not after I'd just paid for Cameron's business headshot session and her manifestation workbook bundle. I wanted to believe that at some point, things would balance out. That once her business got traction, she'd contribute, that we'd be back to 50-50, that I wouldn't feel like I was bankrolling someone else's curated life. But the more I paid, the more she dreamed. And somehow, I was always the one funding the dream. I proposed to Cameron on a Friday night in late May. It was one of those warm Denver evenings where the sun doesn't quite disappear until after 8, and the whole city feels like it's exhaling. I'd made a reservation at a place called Vesper, modern, candlelit, rooftop views, the kind of spot with a wine list longer than the menu. I'd scoped it out weeks earlier. The waiter was in on it. He knew when to bring out the champagne, when to dim the lights just a bit, and where exactly I should kneel so the skyline would be in the background if she took a photo. Of course she did. Several. I'd spent 4 months quietly saving for the ring. Skipped every non-essential expense, brought lunch to work every day, paused my gym membership, even downgraded my Spotify account. It wasn't a massive diamond, but it was a clean, well-cut solitaire in a vintage style setting I knew she'd like. The kind of ring I imagined someone like her, stylish, intentional, effortlessly curated, would wear without irony. She cried when I proposed. Whispered yes before pulling me into a kiss so fast I nearly dropped the ring. She posted about it before we left the restaurant. By the time we got home, her post already had over 500 likes, and she was reading the comments out loud on the couch while I poured us wine. "OMG," finally one said. "You guys are goals." Another, "Cameron, you manifested this." I remember watching her scroll through her phone, eyes glowing, and for a minute, I felt proud. Like maybe I'd finally done something right. The next morning, she had a Pinterest board titled Our Aesthetic. I didn't even know she'd slept. She walked me through her vision over coffee, neutral tones, hand-poured candles, dried florals and massive white vases, a live acoustic duo, and a wedding hashtag she'd already brainstormed. "We're not doing anything cheesy," she said. "This has to be timeless. Editorial. Next level." When I asked about budget, she laughed like I'd told a joke with bad timing. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll keep it elegant, but minimal. Nothing over the top." That was the last time I heard the word minimal. Within 2 weeks, we had toured 4 venues, all with exposed brick and industrial lighting. She had fallen in love with one, a repurposed warehouse near Rhino with high ceilings and polished concrete floors. The price tag for one night, not including catering or rentals, was $60,000. I suggested we look at smaller venues, maybe a mountain lodge or a vineyard just outside the city. She blinked and said, "No offense, babe, but I don't want to get married in a barn with string lights." That's 2016 Pinterest energy. When I asked if we should consider something simpler, maybe even a courthouse wedding followed by a nice dinner with close friends, she physically recoiled. "Do you want this to look like a second marriage?" The dress was another thing. She had already picked one out on Instagram before we even stepped into a store. A custom piece from a designer in New York, $8,000 plus fittings. She said it was worth it because this is the photo that's going to live on every feed forever. I offered to split the cost or at least talk about options. She waved me off. "I'll figure it out," she said, which I now knew meant I'd figure it out. We met with a photographer she followed on TikTok, a guy who only shot on film and charged $4,000 for a half-day shoot. When I showed her a friend's wedding photos that cost a fraction of that and looked perfectly fine, she said they felt emotionally flat. I had no idea what that meant. Every alternative I proposed, cheaper vendors, off-season dates, fewer guests, was shot down. That doesn't fit our brand, she said once, without irony. This isn't just a wedding. It's a story we're telling. The story, apparently, was that we were tastemakers with an unlimited budget. But only one of us actually had a budget. I kept telling myself it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that it mattered to her, that maybe I didn't get it because I wasn't wired the same way. But every time we made a deposit, every time I handed over my card for something that was supposed to be ours, I felt more like a sponsor than a fiancé. And yet, every time I voiced concern, she'd pull me in and whisper, "This is our legacy. People will remember this. We're building something iconic." Iconic. That was the word she used. Not intimate. Not meaningful. Iconic. And I was the one paying for it. By the time we were neck-deep in wedding plans, I had started to see Cameron's career for what it really was, or rather, what it wasn't. For months, she'd been describing herself as a personal brand consultant, a content strategist, a digital presence coach. The titles rotated depending on who was listening, but they all sounded just abstract enough to feel legitimate. In reality, her days were built around content. Not content strategy, just content. Her mornings usually started late. She'd come out of the bedroom in a silk robe around 10:30, coffee in hand, saying she was centering herself for the day. Then she'd disappear into the bathroom for 2 hours of makeup, skincare, and hair, emerging only to ask my opinion on which blouse made her look more elevated, or whether her eyes popped better with the natural or glam lashes. By early afternoon, she'd be dressed in something expensive, always neutral tones, with layered gold necklaces and a tote bag from some Scandinavian brand I'd never heard of. Then came the photos. She had a rotating list of cafes around the city, places with white walls, terrazzo tables, and matcha that cost $9. I'd sometimes tag along on weekends, but mostly, she'd go with friends or tripod it herself. She'd spend hours taking pictures, standing next to lattes she never drank, typing on her laptop with the screen off, gazing out the window like she was contemplating the future of civilization. I once watched her pose with a croissant for 15 minutes, only to throw it away afterward because she wasn't eating gluten this week. By late afternoon, she'd post something on Instagram, usually a photo of her in soft lighting, looking just past the camera, with a caption like, "Stop chasing success. Start remembering who you are." Or, "Stillness is where I meet my truest self." The comments poured in. People telling her she was an inspiration, a muse, that her energy was a gift. I wanted to ask what exactly she had inspired anyone to do besides order an overpriced cappuccino, but I bit my tongue. Every now and then, she'd declare a digital detox, which meant she'd stay off Instagram for 12 hours while using that time to film content about how being offline had helped her reconnect with her inner voice. It was a performance, and she was the star, the director, and the audience all at once. But the part that really got to me wasn't the performance. It was how much I was funding it without even realizing it. She'd buy a new pair of heels and say, "It's not a splurge, it's a tax write-off." Content related. She picked up a linen blazer from a boutique in Cherry Creek and said it was for a shoot she was doing about elegant boundaries. One day she came home with a vintage camera that didn't even work and told me it was a prop for an upcoming post about nostalgia marketing. All of it, every bag, every dress, every set of ceramic plates she insisted were necessary for an aesthetic flat lay, was charged to my account. She had my card saved on her phone. At first, it was small things. Brunch, Ubers, occasional skincare products. Then the purchases grew. Designer shoes, statement earrings, boutique rentals for 1-hour shoots. But because it happened gradually, I didn't notice how much the total added up. I'd check my bank statement and think, did I really spend $500 at Anthropology? Then I'd remember her saying she needed throw pillows that feel grounded in warmth for her self-love content series. She never said thank you, not in the way you say it when you're receiving help. Instead, it was always framed like we were building a life together, and this, her visual storytelling, her aspirational lifestyle posts, was just her way of contributing. This is brand equity, she told me once when I questioned a $200 purchase from a sustainable swimwear company. People need to see the life we live. It builds trust. But there was no we in that life. I was the one holding it up. She was selling a lifestyle where she floated through the world with grace and stillness and intention, and I was the one paying for her to do it. It happened on a Tuesday, late afternoon. I was finishing up with a patient, just a routine shoulder mobility session, and when I checked my phone, I saw a message request on Instagram from a name I didn't recognize. The profile was private, no photo, just a first name that didn't ring any bells. I almost ignored it. I get spam sometimes, random DMs from bots or accounts trying to sell followers, but something about the subject line, "You deserve to know the truth," stopped me cold. Inside was a short message. "I don't know you personally, but I followed Cameron for a while and saw something in a group chat I wasn't supposed to see. I thought you should know who she really is." And then there were screenshots. I sat there in my office chair, door closed, staring at my phone in disbelief as I started scrolling through them. It was a group chat named Bride Squad. Cameron and about 8 other women, most of whom I recognized from brunches, photo shoots, and nights out where I'd paid the bill while they toasted each other with phrases like, "To queens who build empires." The first screenshot hit like a punch to the chest. Cameron had posted a photo of me from the weekend. Me in the kitchen, pouring wine, wearing an apron with some dumb quote she had picked out from a local boutique. The caption she'd written in the chat said, "My emotionally stable ATM machine strikes again. Ladies, marry boring, it pays." Another message followed. "He's sweet, doesn't ask too many questions, and has no clue he's funding a soft launch for my real life." The thread continued, each message worse than the last. "God, I wish I could find one of those," one of her friends had written. "Wallet with arms. Squeeze it while it lasts," another replied. "Put a baby on him next year and you'll be set for life." Cameron chimed back in. "No babies, please. Just enough time to secure the investments. I'm thinking 1 year post-wedding, and then, poof. Conscious uncoupling vibes." I must have read that one sentence 10 times. 1 year post-wedding. Like I was some trial period before the real version of her life began. There was more. Advice about how to play to my protector complex. How to act vulnerable just enough to make me feel needed. Tips on using shared bank accounts without triggering suspicion. A message where Cameron joked about how she staged one of her emotional spirals the same day I suggested cutting back wedding costs. Cried on cue. He offered to pay the photographer in full. Girl math wins again. I felt sick. Not angry yet, just stunned. Numb, really. It was like reading about someone else's relationship. Like I'd accidentally intercepted a stranger's private messages. Except it wasn't a stranger. It was Cameron, the woman I was about to marry. The woman I had defended to friends who raised eyebrows. The woman whose entire life, as it turns out, had been propped up by my bank account and my belief that we were in this together. I read every screenshot the girl sent. Dozens of them. Jokes, plans, bragging. Even a message where Cameron said, "He's cute, sure, but I've had better. He just makes my life easier. He's the on-paper guy, the safe choice." That one stuck in my throat the longest. The safe choice. When I finally looked up from my phone, I realized I had been sitting in the same spot for almost 40 minutes. My legs were stiff. My hands were shaking. The worst part? I couldn't even be surprised. Somewhere deep down, I had known. Not the specifics. Not the cruelty. But something hadn't felt right for a long time. I just didn't want to admit it. And now here it was. Not a gut feeling. Not a hunch. Proof. Right there in black and white. With laughing emojis and heart reactions from people who had toasted me over candlelit dinners and told me how lucky Cameron was to have me. Lucky. Right. I didn't confront her. Not right away. After I read through those screenshots, after the reality of it all set in, I realized that if I was going to walk away from this disaster of a relationship, I wasn't going to do it quietly. Not because I wanted drama, but because I needed her to feel even a fraction of what she'd put me through. And more than anything, I wanted her to know she hadn't outsmarted me. Not even close. So I kept playing the role. The doting fiancé. The reliable wallet. I smiled during wedding planning meetings, nodded along when she showed me yet another overpriced linen napkin color palette, paid the deposits like nothing had changed. I kept receipts, screenshotted every message, bank charge, Venmo request, every little thing I knew I'd need when the curtain finally dropped. I had a digital folder labeled wedding plans that was actually full of her bride squad chat screenshots, expense spreadsheets, and copies of my bank transactions. By the end of it, I had a better archive of her manipulation than she did of her Instagram drafts. And then came Cabo. Cameron had been talking for months about doing a non-basic bachelorette trip. She didn't want Vegas. Too cliché. Miami was too humid. She said she needed something spiritually cleansing but still hot enough for content. Cabo was her pick. She kept using the phrase healing goddess energy like it was a hotel amenity. So I said I'd take care of it. My treat. "You've done so much," I told her. "Let me give you the weekend you deserve." She beamed. Said I was the best. Said she was so lucky to have a partner who got it. I smiled and kissed her forehead while imagining the exact expression she'd have when she realized what was coming. Because what I booked was not the beachfront private villa with champagne on arrival and bottle service by the pool that she had in mind. What I booked was a week-long silent yoga retreat in the mountains above Cabo San Lucas, tucked into some eucalyptus-lined eco-lodge where the rooms had no air conditioning. The meals were vegan and portioned by a wellness coach named Roberta, and phones were locked in a communal box for the duration of the stay. I made the whole thing look legit. Custom itinerary, sleek design, even a fake logo for the resort I created in Canva. I printed physical boarding passes with fake seat numbers and even added an all-inclusive confirmation email with made-up spa treatments and boat tours. Her excitement was off the charts. She posted a story of her suitcase 2 days before with the caption, "Cabo vibes activated." The morning of the trip, I dropped her off at the airport with a green juice and a kiss. "Text me when you land," I said. She promised she would. She didn't. Because the second she stepped off the plane, instead of being met by a black car with champagne and a driver named Esteban, she was picked up in a shared shuttle bus with 10 other women in leggings holding yoga mats and looking like they hadn't seen a margarita in years. The driver handed her a schedule printed on recycled paper with phrases like breath work through discomfort and healing the inner feminine through stillness. The look on her face when she realized her 5-day luxury escape was actually a detox retreat with group chores and a 9 p.m. curfew. I would have paid double to see it. I got one message. A single frantic text before her phone was collected at check-in. "What the hell is this, Justin?" I didn't reply. I let her sit in it. 5 days of silence. No poolside photos, no brunch spreads, no staged sunset selfies. Just group meditation, silent breakfasts, shared bunk rooms, and Roberta's raw beet salad. Meanwhile, back in Denver, I was packing. Not just my stuff, hers too. Every jacket, every sandal, every unnecessary throw blanket she bought for the vibe. I boxed it all up, called her sister to come grab whatever she wanted, and dropped the rest at a storage unit under her name. I canceled the wedding venue. Had already done it days before she left. Called my bank, froze our joint account, closed my credit card, wiped my information from everything. By the time she touched back down on U.S. soil, her access to my money was gone. The apartment was quiet. Clean. Hers was not. The day after I dropped Cameron at the airport, I changed the locks. I didn't wait. There was no part of me that wanted to hear her explanations, her tears, her performative confusion. I knew the playbook. I'd seen enough of it to know exactly how she'd spin it. How she'd cry, say she didn't mean it, say the group chat was just a joke, say I'd taken everything out of context. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a con. I was just the Mark who finally woke up. So I made sure she wouldn't even get the chance to act. By noon that same day, I had already contacted a locksmith and watched as the guy drilled out the old deadbolt and installed a new one on both the front and balcony doors. I packed up every last item that belonged to her. The bathrobe she always left on the bathroom door, the drawer full of crystals and essential oils, the color-coded makeup organizers she insisted had to be kept in a cool, dry place. I folded her clothes into boxes, labeled them by room just to be extra neat about it, and even added bubble wrap around her designer shoes. I rented a small storage unit on the edge of the city, signed a 6-month lease under her name, prepaid it in full, and left the key and access code inside an envelope waiting on top of her things. The same envelope held something else. A note, short and clean. White cardstock. Black ink. No emotion. Just one line. "The wallet is closed. Don't come back." And behind that, a manila folder. Inside the folder were printed screenshots from the Bride Squad group chat. Page after page, color-coded, time-stamped, highlighted in yellow and red. There were copies of every receipt she'd charged to my account since the day she moved in. Her skin treatments, the dresses, the branded content props, the fake business expenses, the photographer for the wedding, the champagne brunches, the courses she never completed, the yoga retreat she never actually paid for. All of it. At the very back, there was a printed spreadsheet. The title at the top in bold. Expenses incurred under false pretenses. Totaled up, item by item, from the first Whole Foods bill she forgot to split to the final wedding deposit I'd covered. $52,486.17. Money I would never get back. I wasn't naive about that. There'd be no reimbursement, no justice in court. I wasn't expecting it. That number wasn't for her to pay. It was for her to see. To know I had counted every dollar, every fake excuse, every quiet moment she turned into a performance. And that I knew exactly what she'd taken from me. Her accounts were all blocked. I removed myself from everything. Streaming platforms, shared storage apps, the Spotify account I'd paid for, even the damn electric bill I'd set up in both our names. I transferred everything back to my own accounts, cut off access to the cards she had stored on her phone, and closed the bank account we opened as a couple. I didn't leave a single door open. By the time her flight landed in Denver, I was already gone for the weekend. I took a solo trip into the mountains. No signal, no noise. Just cold air, silence, and a new lock on a life that no longer had room for her. I don't know when she picked up her things. She must have found the storage unit eventually. I never got a call, never got a message, not even an angry email, just silence. And for once, it felt like exactly what I needed. I didn't hear much about Cameron after Cabo. Not directly, at least. But little things filtered through. Her Instagram went dark within a week of her return. No soft re-entry post, no new grid layout, no story update about healing or clarity or integrating the lessons, as she used to say after any mildly inconvenient experience. Just silence. The account was still up, but all the comments were gone. Her profile photo disappeared. The follower count started dropping. I checked once, out of curiosity, and saw that her most recent post, one of us laughing together on a beach during a weekend trip I paid for, had been deleted. The girl who used to post 3 times a day, schedule content for golden hour, and obsess over her brand tone, had vanished from her own stage. There was no way to perform the role anymore. Not after everything. Her friends, if you could even call them that, turned just as quickly. I didn't plan for that to happen, but it wasn't surprising. People who orbit someone like Cameron often do so because of proximity to the image, not the person. And once the image cracks, the orbit scatters. The girl who'd messaged me anonymously? She'd sent the screenshots not out of loyalty to me, but because Cameron had mocked her in the same group chat just days earlier, saying something about her boyfriend being a financial downgrade, and how she should have learned from me and leveled up. Word got around fast. The bride squad imploded. Girls who had once gassed her up with "Yes, Queen" and "Manifest that man" suddenly went radio silent. I heard through mutuals that 2 of them blocked her entirely. Another posted something cryptic on her story about betrayal and fake friends and how loyalty is louder than likes. I didn't bother to track it all, but I noticed how the echo chamber Cameron used to thrive and had collapsed. The brunch photos stopped. The girl boss collabs she once promoted disappeared. Her name wasn't tagged in anything anymore. Then came the TikTok. I only saw it because someone at work showed it to me, laughing under their breath, not realizing I was the guy in the story. Cameron had rebranded. She had a new account, same face, different tone. The new angle was raw, stripped down, supposedly real. The first video was her sitting in a dimly lit room. No makeup, eyes puffy like she'd been crying for days, saying she had just escaped a toxic relationship with a manipulative partner who weaponized finances to control her. I watched it exactly once. She talked about how she'd lost everything, how she was rebuilding from nothing, how women needed to trust their inner knowing and not let stability become a cage. She never used my name, but the references were clear enough. The comments were brutal, not because people believed her or sided with her. They didn't. The algorithm didn't either. It barely pushed the video out. The views stalled under a few thousand. A handful of comments tried to validate her, but most called her out. Some people recognized her. Others asked where all the old content went. A few even referenced the Cabo retreat and said things like, "Didn't you get exposed?" Or "Didn't you call your fiancé an ATM?" She never replied to any of them. Her second video flopped even harder. By the third, the account was gone. It's strange, watching someone vanish like that. Not physically, but socially. Publicly. Like watching a broadcast fade to static and realizing you never actually knew the station behind it. Cameron had built her life on perception. A curated brand. A polished feed. And when that was gone, there wasn't much left to stand on. And maybe that's the part that hit her the hardest. Not the breakup. Not the money. But the silence that followed. The lack of an audience. The absence of applause. After it was all over, the silence felt foreign at first. I'd spent over a year with someone who filled every room, every moment, every quiet space with performance. Even her stillness had an agenda. So when it was finally quiet, really quiet, it took me a minute to realize that this was what peace was supposed to feel like. I moved a few weeks after the Cabo fallout. Sold the apartment, took a hit on the resale because I didn't want to drag it out. I didn't need the memories. I didn't need to walk past the bathroom where she used to line up her skincare bottles like a storefront, or the kitchen where she faked her content breakfasts with sprouted toast and half-sliced avocados. I found a smaller place just outside the city, nothing flashy, but mine. Clean walls, no forced aesthetic. No one asking if the furniture looked elevated. Cameron was blocked on everything. Phone, email, social, even mutual contacts I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't need any potential. Maybe we could talk, messages slipping through. I made it final. Not bitter. Just done. Then I took a vacation. 2 weeks off. No work. No emails. No favors. I flew to Oregon, rented a small place near the coast, and spent most of the time hiking, reading, just being still. I left my phone on airplane mode more often than not. Woke up early. cooked for myself, watched the sun go down without trying to capture it for anyone else's approval. When I came back, I started putting the pieces of my life back together. This time, for me. I got back into my workout routine, slowly at first, then more consistently. The weight I'd picked up, stress, exhaustion, the kind that doesn't show up in photos but lives in your shoulders and your gut, started to fall off. I cut back on caffeine, started sleeping better. I made a spreadsheet of my finances and faced the number I'd been avoiding. Just over $52,000 gone. Gone to manipulation, to someone else's curated life. And instead of getting angry all over again, I made a plan. I restructured my accounts, opened a new savings line, and started chipping away at what I'd drained. I picked up a few extra clients at the clinic, did some weekend sessions. I sold a few old things, stuff she'd convinced me I needed for the aesthetic. I didn't need any of it. I needed stability, and I was finally giving it to myself. I also went to therapy, once a week. No excuses. I found someone who didn't sugarcoat anything. She helped me unpack what I'd ignored for too long. My need to be the fixer, the reliable one. The guy who says yes just to avoid conflict. We talked about self-worth, about boundaries, about how love isn't supposed to feel like a subscription you forgot to cancel. Somewhere along the way, when I wasn't looking for it, I met someone new. Her name's Erin. We met through a mutual friend at a small dinner. Nothing big, no curated lighting, no couples goals energy. Just conversation. Laughter that wasn't recorded. She works in architecture, lives on her own, pays her own way. The first time she insisted on splitting the bill, I didn't argue. I just let her. We're taking it slow. No rushing, no performative gestures, no financial entanglements. We each have our own lives, and we share pieces where it makes sense. She doesn't expect me to pay for her existence. She doesn't talk about manifesting abundance or turning vulnerability into content. She just shows up, and I do too. I made it clear from the start. No joint finances. Not until marriage. And even then, limited. I told her everything. Not to scare her off, but because I needed to say it out loud. I needed to own what had happened. What I'd allowed. She didn't flinch. Just nodded, listened, and said, good. Boundaries are attractive. For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again. Not a version of me curated for someone else's feed. Just me. Whole. Standing on ground I built without anyone's help. It came on a Sunday morning, like these things always do. A new number. No name. Just a message, sitting there quietly at the top of my screen. I've changed. I'm sorry. I miss you. No explanation. No details. Just that. I stared at it for a second. Not long. Not because I didn't know who it was. Of course I did. But because I didn't feel anything. No anger. No heat in my chest. No spike in my heart rate. Just stillness. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down, walked into the kitchen, and made coffee. The good kind. Fresh beans, French press, the sound of water just starting to boil. Sunlight coming in through the kitchen window. My place was quiet, clean mine. The way I liked it. I sat at the table, took a sip, and smiled. A small one. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you're not going to let back in. Because some people don't deserve closure. They don't deserve your explanation, your kindness, your time. They had it. They misused it. And what they get instead are the consequences, the silence, the locked doors, the clean breaks, the parts of you they'll never access again. That's all they get. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever walked away from something that tried to sell itself as love, but was really just control with a soft voice? What do you think someone like Cameron was really chasing? And what do people like that deserve in the end? Let me know. I'd really like to hear what you think.